Well, it took 5 days, but finally a jury has been selected in the Karen Reed murder trial, and opening statements are set for Monday. Now, this is an interesting one. So, Reed is accused of murdering her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, back in January of 2022. How? Well, authorities say she backed over him with her Lexus SUV and left him to die in a snowy front yard outside of a house party. Evidence suggested that the couple had a tumultuous relationship, they had been fighting, you get the idea. Now, Reed's lawyers say, wait a second. Then, also, I should say, it's also an army of social media supporters on her behalf. They say the evidence doesn't add up. They say that the victim's injuries are more consistent with O'Keefe being beaten than a hit and run, and claim that evidence against Reed was planted. Now, O'Keefe's death happened outside of the home of a very well-connected former cop with deep roots in the community, and there are accusations of a cover-up that were seemingly credible enough that a federal investigation was opened into this case, which our understanding is it's still ongoing. And now we have the trial. And just yesterday, the judge set down some really important ground rules. First up, DNA from hair allegedly found on Reed's bumper will be admitted into evidence. We know Reed will not be allowed to go with jurors to the crime scene, and that FBI investigation I mentioned, it won't be mentioned in the courtroom. I want to bring in Dana Kennedy. She is an investigative reporter for the New York Post and knows this case as well as anybody. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Fascinated with this case. Can we just start with the fact that the federal investigation's not being brought in? That feels like a big loss to the defense.
A huge loss for the defense, and this is where the social army of supporters that you mentioned come in, because there's probably not a juror in the Boston area that hasn't read about this case. You know, regardless of what they say, there's tons of people that have been parsing this. Law enforcement, retired law enforcement, getting the word out. So I can't believe those jurors have not heard that the FBI is investigating.
And it's a big loss because I understand that there was a reconstruction expert who actually said these injuries are more consistent or not consistent with a hit and run. Talk about the jury for a second. So there are 19 jurors selected, right, but they only need 16? I don't understand that.
My understanding is what came out in court is that there's some hardship thoughts about this. That first of all, it's going to be an 8-week case, and some of the jurors have already said that they are not sure they can do the whole thing. And also, prosecutors are doing something unusual. They're asking for Corey background checks, and a lot of jurors are sort of uncomfortable with this. And the idea,
if you can explain what that is.
That just means that if you're going to be a juror, I'm going to really look in to see who you are, right, if you have any criminal background, and people are understandably nervous about that. And also, if they find out that someone, say you're a juror, that you do have some questionable background, they might have to, you know, deep six you and call somebody else.
I would think it's also they're nervous about the publicity, right?
Yeah.
So you have this swarm of people outside the courthouse, signs.
Unbelievable.
And I actually haven't seen anything like it since, I will tell you, when I covered the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. Right. But you see this, and I would imagine they could be intimidated and say, I can't sit on the jury anymore.
100%.
And I think that's a major concern. But the fact, are they going to be sequestered?
I don't think so. I'm not sure that's been decided yet.
Okay, so but you think they're going to narrow it down? We're going to get the jury.
Yeah.
There's something very strange about where this case is the trial's taking place.
Yeah.
There's been an issue of the courtroom.
Yes,
and whether
for good reason.
Yeah,
yes,
can you explain what's going on there?
Yes, because the way the courtroom was set up, the jurors wouldn't be able to necessarily see all the witnesses clearly in the witness box. And one of the lead attorneys, David Yannetti, even sat in the box to show that some of the jurors would not be able to see, or the defendant would not be able to see exactly, you know, who's testifying against her, for example. So they're moving it to a much smaller courtroom, which is going to mean that there'll be less people allowed in to see it, less family, et cetera. But it's going to work better for the defendant and for the jurors.
He has a constitutional right to face the accusers, right?
Absolutely.
So what does that mean in terms of reporting it, in terms of seeing what's happening in that courtroom?
I think you're going to need to get there at like 3 in the morning to get in.
Johnny Depp Amber Heard once again. So the judge ruled on this DNA. Right. Regarding this hair.
Yes.
I know what it is, but you explain to our viewers why it's so important.
Well, right now, this is still not completely clear what's going to happen with this.
Oh, really? I thought it was the hair that might be Mr. O'Keefe's.
Allegedly, this is a piece of hair found on the bumper of O'Keefe's. But the problem with this whole case is that car, first of all, Karen's vehicle, her SUV that you mentioned earlier, it traveled basically 70 miles that day in between going to John O'Keefe's house, going back to the house they shared, going to her parents' home in Dighton, the police and seizing it. So the idea that this one little hair somehow survived 70 miles in snowy conditions And then you have to realize that this guy lived with Karen Reed, so his DNA was probably on the SUV and areas to begin with.
Well, here's the thing.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.